Hope that everyone is going fine. Finally, we are going back live after quite a while. We had quite a while of time we didn't stream, and finally we're back. And we're gonna be back with something very, 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 very interesting that will happen in next week. Let me just adjust some volumes. Maybe the music is too loud. No, it is not. Okay. Okay. So what are we gonna do today? Uh, well, today we're gonna basically start to build a warehouse application using effects. But that will mean that we need to do some planning first. We need to decide how we want to structure our application, which are the requirements, which effect library are going to be involved, which libraries or code we are going to build ourselves. There's going to be a lot of interesting, I think, that we will cover during this project. So let's start maybe by drawing something about the requirements that we're gonna have. So maybe we can start with an can only draw. Okay. I have also something to read because yeah, today wasn't quite a light day at work. So yeah. Okay, so let's stand by what are the overall requirements for the application we are trying to build. I said warehouse management, but it is not actually completely true. The requirement we want for our application are the following. We need to be able to define products within a little name. Okay. And by products, I mean any good moved in the warehouse. And we need also to be able to define warehouses and be able to register movements of goods between warehouses. And are the domain requirements for our application. So while building our application, we come back and update these requirements, eventually adding things. So for example, let's start by maybe defining products. Each product should have a unique identifier, which is basically a SKU. We want to attach images. We want maybe an unit of measure. Pieces or kilograms, etc. We want indeed to also be able to keep the stocks. So we have the SKU, we have maybe also product name. We want to attach images. We want a unit of measure. And then we want to define warehouses. And the thing is that this kind of application will be basically used by um, an association I am part of, and we want to use this application to keep track of the goods that are moving between the warehouse that our association manages, and also uh, the goods that every member of the association have itself at home. So it happens that people take things from the warehouse, they bring back home, um, use it, and then put back the things into the warehouse. And the problem that the application is trying to solve is basically keeping track of who took what, where things are, and then based on that, we can keep track if everything got lost, or when we need to check if all the goods or the items are okay, we know exactly where they are. So basically, the warehouses can be of two kind. One will be an actual location, like for example, the main address of our association. Main address, or things like temporary rent warehouses, or things like, as I said, how can I include it? At home of any member of the association. So this is basically where the goods can be stocked: in an actual location, in a temporary rent warehouse, or at home of any member of the association. And when we register movements of goods between warehouses, what we want to be able is basically each member of the association can move items only on owned warehouses. And that means that me, as a member of the association, I can define that I moved goods only between the warehouses I am part of. So I can say that I move thing from the main location to my house, and from my house back to the main location. But for example, I cannot say that I moved from the goods from the house of another member A to the house of another member B. Okay, and that is because, as I said, the main um, purpose of this application is to track where the goods of our association, which is a non-profit association. I can show you what we basically do. This is a very old site, indeed. Doesn't load anymore. Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so fantastic, mozzarella. So our association does basically this. We do historical revocation. And so all the things that you can see here, for example, we have all the drums or the flags. Everything is something that we need to keep track who has what, because it's becoming a mess with all the people keeping track of who has what. So as I said, each member of the association can move items, and we will have also like super members can move between anywhere else. So for example, if I am the responsible for the drums, I can say that I moved drums into warehouses and houses of people, even if I don't own the house, because that can be me actually bringing the goods to that warehouse. And then we need to update the stocks. This will be the basic requirements. One thing that we can discuss on is that we have defined products, but I would like to have an additional level of precision. That is that some kind of products, some kind of items have actually an additional level that allows me to um, specifically get which item is where. Because, for example, you can imagine that we have, for example, the belt that are used by the drummers to wear the drum. And the belt have, on each belt, we have a serial number. That is because each belt has a range of measures that can accommodate. So some belts are okay for be used by children's. Some belts are too small for to be used by any adult people. So maybe we can define that as kind of lots or batch. Define product, maybe product serial numbers. And when when moving products managed by serial, we need to provide the serial number as well. So for some kind of items, we will be able to just keep track of the stocks. And for other items, we will be able also to keep track of stocks by serial number. So keep stocks just by amount or by amount per serial number. So each serial number cannot exist in two different locations at one time. So these are the domain requirements. And that means that one other thing that we should have is be able, every user should have an account for basically authentication. But I'll have an additional level that means that you can log in as a member. So I can log in as Mattia Manzati into the application, but I'd like to allow people to authenticate themselves, but also impersonate other persons. But because that you need to understand that in our association we have a lot of members that are young, and so they don't have a smartphone. They will not be able to register data into the application themselves. So they will have an adult doing that for them, maybe their parents. And so that means that we need to provide authentication by login by, let's say, email and password. Nothing fancy. But I also want to be able to impersonate members. And that will mean that a parent may impersonate child. So that allows, for example, to say that if I am a parent and my children is bringing the drums at home, I can say that my children will bring the this run home. Implement authentication, nothing fancy. Yeah, oh yeah. Nothing fancy. By nothing fancy, I mean no, nothing of like OAuth, nothing. Just a cold plain authentication where you provide an email and password, and then by getting the email and password, you get an access token, and that access token is used for subsequent requests, and that's it. And so I was saying that maybe I want to split this feature in two kind of entities, in two kind of things. I want to authenticate as a user, but I want also a concept of association member, person. And the association member, we can then say that can be impersonated by user. And we have here the example that a parent may impersonate a child. So that will allow that I can log in as mattia.manzati@gmail.com, and I can impersonate myself as an association member. But for example, my mother, which is not very good with phone, can be registered in the application as well, but I can manage for my mother the data into the application. Okay, so we authenticate by logging in password, and then we can impersonate members. And then we need to have a product catalog that will have a unique code, a product name. We can attach an image, maybe just one. Starting describing the product, the unit of measure, define the product serial numbers. And when moving products by serial, we need to provide a serial as well. And then we have warehouses that can be an actual physical location, a temporary equivalent warehouse. And in the home of a member association, we can register movements of good and etc. Okay, so I think that this gives an idea of what we want to build. And then maybe we want also to get stocks by career. Okay, so I think that those are the basic requirements that I want. Okay, just save this. It's fine. Okay. Okay, so maybe we can start doing some actual code. Okay. Okay. So to do all of this, we will definitely require some effect libraries. I think that we will use effect SQL, effect schema indeed, maybe even effect RPC, maybe. I'm unsure about that because I would like to build something just to try it out pattern. But yeah, we will see. Okay, so let's start building something. Okay. Thanks to let's increase the different size. Okay. So thanks to Maxwell, we can do the end of the aim, create effect latest. Okay. Okay. What is your project named? I will call this RSP. What will template I want to create a template, and I think that I will start by using monorepo. I don't want to change that for now. Yeah. Yes, lint. Yes, it is. If GitHub Actions, maybe not for now. Okay. So now we move into our SPR and then install. And while that's installing, we can open that SPR. Okay. So I think that we should start by creating some domain things. Okay, here we already have something SketchUp. Thanks to the create effect up. But I think that I changed things. I leave files for now. This can be removed. Move to trash and create something new. Okay, so I would like to define entities inside this kind of application. The kind of entities that we'll have are kind of listed in here from the left. So I want to have things like a product, and we will define a third schema. Text or cost product ID. I want, maybe I should increase the font size, maybe. Please. Oh yeah, I think that's better. Nice. Okay, I want the product Z to be a schema, UUID, type, schema, annotation, genetic fire. This is a product ID. Okay, and a score type product ID equals schema dot schema type report product ID. Maybe we can do something more fancy. This is just a string. So we can do something like schema dot branded, and the brand can be something like also product ID type, maybe schema dot symbol dot for product ID. Let's go like this for now. We can always refactor that data. Okay. Perfect. And now the product is a string. Okay. So we can also start defining a product. Or maybe we can just keep a product ID here. But yeah, export the post product, which is schema struct. And we'll have product ID equal product ID. Name will be schema dot string. String, I said. Okay, and also type schema dot I then notations identifier. This is our product. Okay. So this is a product. As we said, we have a product name. We also need to have, well, as Q, we have a product ID. Maybe we can start without and maybe the skill we can define later, but definitely a product name. We need to define an image and a unit of measure. Okay. So let's define unit of measure. Okay. And we will do something like the thing that we did. Unit of measure type ID. Unit of measure. Unit of measure ID. Oh no. Maybe yeah, we need a measure ID. UUID. Unit of measure ID type ID. Okay. Okay. Oh, right. ID type ID. Okay. I was complaining. Why are you saying that that's not used? Well, this isn't it. Okay, this is one unit of measure. Here unit of with this data measure ID. And I want name to be string. And maybe an unempty string. That's better. An empty string. Maybe that was as well for the product, non-empty string. And then type keynote annotations. I have the fire and this is unit for the. Okay. So now in the products, we can import everything as unit for layer one unit of measure, and we will say that in the unit of measure ID is unit of measure in the layer ID. Okay. It's to be exported. Otherwise, TypeScript will complain that cannot access that. Oh well. And now we have defined our product. Now that we have our product, we can define a member. Member. And will be something like import everything as schema. From effect schema. And we'll say const by the type ID equal symbol. Yeah. And member ID. And we will please say that that's this to be exported. And we also say export close member ID, the schema UUID. I will basically use your UUID for everything as primary key. We will also say schema dot annotations identifier member ID. Okay. And we'll also define a member. Schema dot struct member ID will be a schema dot not schema, sorry, will be a member ID, and we'll have name as schema dot non-empty string surname, non-empty string, and usually that's okay. Maybe you can ask also for the birthday, date. Export type, longer, beacon, schema dot type, ball, and then low. And we can also schema dot annotations, identifier, then this will be a member. Okay. Okay, so back to our drawing board. We have defined a product, a member, and maybe we can also define a warehouse. Where warehouse. So we have defined that as a requirement, we want to have different kind of warehouses. We want physical, locational, temporary, or form of any member. So maybe we can express that into the warehouse, that's the type. So we need to import again our students as schema from. So we want the export const. Whereas ID will be something like schema.uid pipe. As you can see, all of these things are pretty repetitive, but in the beginning, everything is. So where was ID? And maybe also we want to create a export const or whereas ID type ID symbols dot for. Oh yeah, effect is in human intelligence instead of artificial. Oh yeah. Method. So I want a warehouse. It should be strat. We have, guess what? A warehouse ID. Or should I buy the fx.co domain and just put my face on the index page? Oh yeah, Dylan, you should. You should indeed. You should indeed. Okay, warehouse ID name. We want a name for the warehouse. There will be just as descriptions, name to string. I also want something like owner ID that will be a member. Because as we said, we have warehouses that are actually the home of any member of the association. So maybe we want something the owner ID to be schema of option. And we want maybe import thing as member. Hello. For example, something that I would like to have, I don't know it because I didn't really invested time in looking for it. I don't know if it's possible for the auto completion and auto imports of the TypeScript LSP to always prefer this kind of style of inputs. And that is because basically I got used to this style that I like most. I prefer having long names. I don't care too much about tree-shakeability because that could be done. Because if I do something like, let's say that I want to do something like const a equals hash map. I do not want to import hash map from effect. I want import everything as hashmap from effect hashmap. Okay, so I want the member. So now a warehouse can be defined as warehouse that have a name, and optionally, if the warehouse is home of someone, I can define that optionally that is the member that is responsible for that warehouse. I want to schema, dot annotations, identifier, warehouse. Okay. So we have a member of products, a unit of measure, and a warehouse. Okay. So those are basically the basic domain objects I want to have. And regarding the movements, I want to address that later after we have the infrastructure for defining products and whatever. Because I think that before we need to build the UI and the server code just managing and defining and creating products. Once we have that working, then we can move into all of the rest. We will also do basic registration and authentication of ourselves, as I said. So before tackling that, will take a while. Let's maybe speak a little about how I want to structure the application. So I would like to take an approach where everything is mostly defined by schemas, by data. I want to define kind of requests going from the client to the server. I'll have basically, I think, two different kinds of requests. I will have comments saying to going to the server and queries going to the server. So we can imagine that we will have our small React Native app with effect. And this application will speak with a Node.js HTTP API server. And we will indeed have some kind of storage involved. So we will have here SQL storage. Most of those will be on the server. This will be on the client. And I would like to picture this as something where I don't care too much about the shape of the actual exposed HTTP APIs. Maybe more than HTTP API server is more an RPC server. So maybe we can use Effect RPC, for example. But I want the flow of any request to be in the shape of, let's say that the app does something. So for example, the app changes a product name. So we'll trigger a request saying change product name to the server. And now that this request goes from the app to the server will handle the request. And now let's say that in the screen, we already have you already have, for example, opened the specific product that we are editing. I want that to be updated as soon as the server receives the data. So I could do that basically in two ways. I could say that when I change a product name, I send a message to the server, and then I immediately ask back for the entity, saying, for example, get look name. No, I don't like that. I would like it more when you allow me to rotate the text. Get product name. So we change the product name, and then we need somehow to trigger from the app the request of data to get updated data. Because now that we have changed the product name, the data is different. So the server may have, for example, refused to update the product for some reason, or the product may have been changed by someone else. So we needed to trigger that. And one thing I thought is that maybe we can have either a WebSocket or either like an event stream that once the change product happened on the server, it sends back something like, I don't know, entity change. And we also say the entity ID, entity 12 changed. So that way, when we when we get the request in our application, if given the message, we are able to know which is the entity that is involved into that request. We can keep that into a cache, into the React Native auth. And whenever that event source stream says that that specific entity we are rendering on the screen has changed, we can then trigger a request to get updated data. That way, we get something that is almost always live. So if, for example, you are in the screen of changing something about the product, you are the screen that you see the information about the product, and some other user changes the product, you get for free live update, real-time updates. So you will see the update screen with the new product as soon as the other user changes. And I want to use an event source stream instead of actually using a WebSocket. Just because that's easier. I don't want to use the right side of the WebSocket. I want just to use the read side, just to stream back these kind of informations about the entity has changed. So that means that we have two different kind of requests that we can send to our server. You have the right ones without comments, and we will mark those as red, for example. And we will get the queries with the blue. So I want to define in a really easy way messages that can be both comments or queries. So I think that we need to first define that concept I named before of an entity, an aggregate. So we could say something like aggregate root, for example. And I want to try out this approach because right now at work, we have a production application where everything works, but we don't have basically this stream. And the other things are basically the same that I described. The only thing that we don't have is this entity change with the aggregate ID stream. And that means that every time we see that we are sending a write request over the wire, what happens is that every GET request gets performed again. And that's unfortunately a limitation of the backend, because at work we have .NET backend, unfortunately. We will slowly move that into effect next year. But yeah, unfortunately right now it's .NET code, and they don't support having that kind of strings. So we just stuck with whenever we send a write command, when we get an OK message received by a server, we trigger immediately an update of the cache of all the messages. And here we can use effect request resolver to resolve all of this and use an effect cache. Yeah, that could work. Okay, so I need to define an aggregate root. And I want an aggregate root to be something that and will abbreviate your name, which is a strings. And the aggregate root now has this Philip aggregate root name widget root thing. And I will use this interface. I will implement this interface by all the kind of aggregate that we will have in our application. Member aggregate, product aggregate, stock aggregate, or whatever. And now, let's see. Let me move this box behind. An aggregate root. And we need to construct aggregate root. Maybe we can do something like const aggregate roots type ID, symbol, or aggregate root. And then we could say that maybe we will define position interface with here. We also want to have aggregate in root type ID, CDF type, aggregate root type ID. Aggregate root type in a type podcast. It would pass the name, and that's fine, that's nice. And then I want to maybe expose some constructor. Okay. So maybe, yeah, we can also set for the function aggregate root bring hint root name as we'll see args aggregate root args. And this will do return this will return an aggregate root of aggregate root name. So here we are missing aggregate root name and slot. We need to define aggregate root part. Aggregate names, aggregate name. Okay, stop. Okay, so this way we can create, for example, let's create scratch. Yes, you can do something like import everything There's aggregate root from aggregate root. I will say columns, for example, product aggregate. They will create aggregate root called aggregate root name product. Products is set. Okay. Okay, so this is nicely typed. I will say that it's an aggregate root of type products. And as we said, we have two different kinds of, did I close it? Okay. We have two different kind of messages that we will send from the app to the server, which are comments and query. Maybe I can create some basic schema that goes for both the comment and queries. And maybe I can call that aggregate message. Maybe. And I want this to be basically a schema. I want with stem schema dot. Let's start by schema dot class. And then we will move on from that. Okay, so all of those messages, I think that will have some common properties. Yeah, you want last okay. Okay. I was saying that I want some common properties on all the messages. I want, for example, ID. An ID will be maybe something like for false, bring it with an ID. And for now, I'll go by ID. And I also want the message to know which is the entity that this message is stated to. I don't want to have different endpoints for its aggregate. For the reason I described before, that if every message contains the aggregate ID it is target to, that means that I can do cache validation immediately because I know which are the entries that I need to validate. So yeah, we can say something like aggregate root equals schema dot length string. We are also aggregate ID schema. UUPD, maybe no. Let's start with non-empty. Okay. Okay, so we'll have an ID, aggregate root, and aggregate ID. And that's it by the aggregate message. So let's start also to sketch out the aggregate query. So let's go back to the Scratchpad and seek for the kind of API I would love to have. I would love to have some APIs that works like export class, let's say change your product name, extend product aggregate the comment. I think that I will need to pass again the class name. Then I would like to say something like the tag is change product name and the payload for this message is something like a new name in the schema dot on the string. Yeah, I definitely need to code that code action that for comments, we will have also a success type, then maybe schema dot win, and failure type that can be like schema dot never, in case that action cannot change. This is the kind of API that I would like to have. We don't have those at the moment, but I can see that this way I can define comments for my entities, and maybe I can do kind of the same for the query. If that's all you need, could you just use a standard request from schema, no? Well, I could use just a tagged request from schema, but the thing is that I would like to also be able to tag those, such as we know by the data type if that is query or a comment, and I want that information to not be passed over the wire. So that will be one information that needs to be attached to the class. So what Maxwell is saying for people that are not used by using effect is that schema or zip already has something like export class change product name with schema that goes like extends schema dot target request and change floating with schema. So let me just comment the other ones just to let you show what what Maxwell is saying is that you can do things like fx schema. Okay, we have schema.tag request, and then we pass in a tag that we want to use. That could be this one, and then we define which is the payload. Where we, for example, new name schema dot non-empty string, and success will be schema dot boolean, and failure will be schema dot never. Okay, so what Maxwell is saying that basically this API I am trying to accomplish is almost the same of this one. The only thing that changes in here is that here we are missing the additional information we want to have for our messages that we have defined before. That means that to do the same thing, we would need to use something like let's say that this is one UUID, and then this is actually products. And this would be the same thing by just using affect schema. I want to create an API that stays on top of that, just to don't have the thing of defining those fields every time. But now that you are saying that, I realize that I could do something fancy and maybe do something like dot product aggregate dot fields, because what we did here, we can extract that into a structure like this, and then we can do a fill. That could do the same thing, and we can move the construction of this one into the aggregate fruit constructor. In here, and we can say something like calls message fields. Okay, and we need to import schema. Then we need also to say that the aggregate root also contains a field named message field. Omni metadata. And that metadata fields is made from aggregate root metadata fields of aggregate root names. Now we need to define this type. This of aggregate root name equals, and we have ID, which is type of schema to UID, and then the aggregate root schema tag aggregate root name, and aggregate ID schema non-empty string. Okay, and we name the metadata fields. So if data fields and schema of tag of the. Okay, we're up into something. Now we can do other dot metadata fields. And what are you complaining about? Oh, I passed something in that is not an actual schema typo. I don't need that one. Okay, we're up into something. Okay, that means that if I try to use the make constructor, make. Okay, the new name is required, the ID is required, the aggregate root is not required because will be automatically filled with products and products only. Yeah. And the aggregate ID is what I want to say. So if I wanted to change a product name, we'll say new product. And we'll say that the ID of the message is message. And we'll also see that the aggregate ID is product ABC. That could work. Thanks for the suggestion as well. Yeah, that could work. Definitely could work. The only thing that the only thing is that may be additional required is that way I do not have, by just knowing that, I do not know if this is a query for a command. I need to attach value just into the runtime type that says this message is a query or this message is. But otherwise, that could definitely work. It is not so different from the API I envision. It's very, very similar. And it's also more easier. Yeah, that could work. Definitely. Definitely. And the only thing that we need to find a way to attach is, as I said, a way to tell if this tag request is a query or a comment. But yeah, because could be something like static message type query. Let's say that this is the most kind of absurd, simple thing that we can do. But yeah, I like this one more in kind of being more short and more explicit, but I like this one more in terms of being more effect standard, not something completely custom. So nothing that won't require any for example type level magic to get the typings right, because that would have required that. It is the schema target request. Maybe can we dot by? I am thinking something weird. The equals. If I have something that goes like function pass, a function would. Yeah, I could just use annotation. That is the thing that I was thinking. Yeah, I could use an annotation just to do that. Yeah, because the only thing that concerns me about using annotations is that I do not have type level information about the thing being a command or a query. That is the only thing that concerns me. The thing that I was about to try is something like make query of A. Let's say that you return A, and is query. Let me just try. If I have a function that has a signature like that, okay, make query. Okay, so this change product with schema. Yeah, that could work. That could work. that has the additional type level information to know that this is a query. And yeah, that could work. Yeah. And the actual implementation could be more like something like this is the base class, and I want to return this class x extends. Okay, let me just finish this one. Config is query. Okay, and here obviously I need to return. Okay, and here obviously it complains because this needs to be something newable. But yeah. And what are you going to bring for a boolean is not? Oh yeah. Um. Yeah. This is always yeah. Let's not just with I want doesn't I just want to. It's any party, guys. Okay. I just want to see if that works. So this query now has a static field that says this query. Yeah. And now if I have something else that is not a query, that won't have that static field. Yeah. That will work. Yeah. Okay. I think that my time is running out, so we will work on these APIs better next time. But thanks again, everyone, for joining. And thanks for every suggestion you made. And see you next time, folks. Bye bye.